I came in first place at the Stockholm Regional playing Pure Dracotail, meaning I elected not to play any copies of Branded Fusion in my deck. Let's talk about it. Starting with the main deck, I have 3 copies of 5 mana, 3 copies of Lucius, 1 Frixel, 3 copies of Mululu, 1 Urgula and 1 Pan. I get the sentiment of wanting to play more of these, because mainly for the mirror match, where it can be quite grindy, having multiples of these, just to draw them and naturally have one in hand and one in the deck, could actually come up. However, I really want to draw non-engine, or my superior engine pieces like the Dark End Dragon, which allows me to perform a powerful combo when I go first. As such, I don't really want to draw a bunch of Urgulas and Pans. They don't contribute to my game plan aside from being a fusion material, and at that point I have quite a lot already. And as for Frixel, this card's really good. Even though I'm not playing Branded Fusion, just having that one more name is very important. But I'm also not trying to specifically draw Frixel either, thus I think just the 1 copy is fine. And that's it for the Dracotail names. Then for the spells, I have 3 copies of Ketu, and 3 copies of Rahu. I would be surprised if they actually hit either of these. These aren't really the good cards in the deck to draw. If you have to start with these, then you can't use them later on in the turn. I would much rather begin my turn with 5 mana or Mululu, as they just allow me to fuse for free. I can then set these spells and then use them to gain further advantage. Sometimes you want to start with this when you go second because it's a breaker, but that's not something that you should limit in the deck. I think if you were to hit this deck, the only thing that makes sense is to limit 5 mana, or putting her to 2 if you just want to do a slap on the wrist hit, which would just make this deck more akin to Genesis format, where due to its point cost, 5 mana is basically limited. I did an in-depth profile of my Genesis Dracotail deck, so should you be interested in Genesis format, or just Dracotail in general, then you can check that out below. But that's it for the Dracotail spells. Then for the traps, I have 1 Flame, 1 Horn and 1 Sting. I think you want to main all 3 of these, so when you go first you can actually ensure that you win the game. Dracotail can have the issue of just getting ran over when you go first, even when they don't even hand trap you in your combo. But if you play all 3 traps, albeit they make you going second slightly worse in game 1, they ensure that if you win the roll, you're not just gonna lose to a combo deck. But that's it for the Dracotail cards. Before I jump into the other engine pieces, I want to touch a bit more on why I decided not to play Branded Fusion in my deck. Branded Fusion by itself is not a bad card. It's a 1-card combo that even gets you to a Mirror Jade, or an Albion, which is just further disruptions and plays in the opponent's turn. So why did I not play this card? The fault of this card isn't necessarily written on the card, which is something I've discussed in previous videos, where you can't just evaluate one card based on what the card does. You have to evaluate your cards based on how they change your deck building, and how the deck changes as a whole. Playing something like Ash Blossom Joy Spring in your deck doesn't really change your deck. Mostly it's only when you draw the Ash that'll actually do something. However, with Branded Fusion, in order to play this card, you have to play a bunch of Branded Fusions. And in doing so, you might not be able to fit Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres into your extra deck, or Mud Dragon, or Garura, or perhaps Typhon. And that's just because of the sheer amount of Branded Fusions you have to play in order to play this card. Additionally, this card locks you from the entire turn. So it's not like Rahu, where you can make a Seals and then activate Rahu and you're completely fine. With Branded Fusion, you can only activate this card should you not have summoned anything but fusions previously this turn. And obviously it also locks you for the rest of the turn as well. That means that when you don't draw this card, you likely won't have these options in your extra deck, which makes every single hand without this card also worse. Additionally, what does Dracotail lose to? Retaliating Sea. And this is a spell card that summons a fusion monster, so they can Retaliating Sea on the Branded Fusion, similar to a Rahu. So in a vacuum, Branded Fusion just seems insane. It's the only 1-card combo in your deck. It allows you to do a whole bunch of plays that can seem way stronger than what the Dracotail deck can do without this card. However, every single hand without this card will just be worse on average, due to the limitations you yourself put on your extra deck. So what are some other cards that you can play instead that don't lose to Retaliating Sea, and work in your deck and doesn't have to change it that much? So when you draw them, they're good, and when you don't draw them, it's also fine. Well, those cards are the Dark End and the Light End package. These cards are a retrain of the old Light End Dragon and Dark End Dragon from the 5Ds era, the Dark End being very good in Edison formats, and the Light End at least has cool artwork. But in Modern, with these retrains, they're effectively polymerization on legs, while also being a dragon monster, and level 8. And make sure to stay until the end of this video. I'll show a combo where if you draw either of these, any monster, and say Mululu for example, you can do some quite powerful combos. But we'll talk about that later on. Then I have one copy of Pot of Prosperity. Pot of Prosperity can be a great starter card, allowing you to dig for 6 or 3 cards at the top of your deck. I didn't expect much Droll and Lockbird in the main deck for this event, which can be a punish for this card. If you were to activate Prosp at the start of your turn to dig for something, and they Droll you, because they had Droll in their main deck for example, then your Ketu and Lucius would just be dead, which is quite unfortunate. But as long as people aren't maining this card, they likely won't have it post side. There isn't really a punish to you activating Pot of Prosperity in this deck. And there are some really good cards to dig for with its effect, such as the other spell that I'm playing in my deck, which is Triple Tactics Talent. A lot of people don't play spells in Dracotail, and that is because you need some amount of monsters to fuse with. But that's the thing, some amount. You don't need your entire hand of 5 cards to be 5 monsters. In my experience, a lot of the time if you just open 4 monsters, that's more than enough to fuse with. And most of the deck are just monsters anyway, or spells which gets you to fusion with, thus effectively acting like monsters on their own. And as long as you can activate either of these, if you talent to draw 2, you'll likely see a monster. If you prosp and dig for 3 or 6, you'll likely see a monster, should you really need that monster to fuse with. Other than that, a lot of people say Dracotail can be a very underwhelming deck. These cards just allow you to sack your opponent. By having powerful cards in your main deck, you can and will draw these cards at some point. And especially the talents can just be game winning on its own. While the Prosp can dig for certain board breakers, talent itself, or other powerful cards, mainly post side. And then for the Handtraps, I have one copy of Magnamut. I decided to main deck this card without any other Bestials, and that's because this card can add your engine. I'm also making Hieratic Seal a lot more on my end board, so having the Magnamut to float into with Seals' effect can be quite good. Even though a lot of the time if you do get to that point you're already winning. But should your opponent have an above average hand, it could be needed that the Magnamut needs to be summoned off of Seal, and then that grabs you something in the end phase, as opposed to you summoning a Pan or Urgula and then fuse it away for a pop. And just drawing the Magnamut can be quite good. You can loop it with Arfalion, and use this card to banish cards like Murakumo against Mitsurugi. Then for the other Handtraps, I have 3 copies of Nibiru, the Primal Being. A common phrase is that Nib needs to be paired in order to be good. And whilst that is true, the Dracotail deck is a bit different. When you go first, your endboard might need some backup. And as long as you can navigate things properly, just having the traps, as well as the regular setup when you go first, backed up by a Nib, is very difficult for your opponent to break through. As long as you know when to use this at an opportune time, these are some of the best cards to pair with Nib, because they can be so versatile in that they can hit extenders or certain engine cards that can allow them to push through or stop your Nibiru. Same goes for the Sting, and the Horn bouncing back their monsters to the hand will just force them to summon more monsters in order to commit to actual good cards. So Nib has good pairs in this deck, and it allows you to survive in that it's very difficult to OTK through a Nib when they go second into you, and you can pair this with your various other non-engine or engine cards. And when you go second, whilst Nib doesn't stop your combo on its own, you could use this card to prevent something like Arclight, which can be a very annoying floodgate for your spells. Or you can just fuse away with the Nib and then turn it into something else. Generally you can make do by having one monster that is dead in your hand, and just use that to fuse with. And that's why my other Handtraps aren't dead when I go second. And that is 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 3 copies of Mulcharmi Fuvalos, and 3 copies of Mulcharmi Perulio. You may notice that I didn't main deck Droll and Lockbird, Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion, or Effect Veiler. Those cards to me felt quite lackluster for this format. And being a regional, I expected a lot of diverse decks, which ended up being the case. I was very happy with my non-engine. In hindsight, there was a lot of Dracotails, so perhaps I should have had something else in my side deck or main deck for that matchup. I think the Dracotail mirror can be quite skillful, but that's only really the case if one player is way more skillful than the other. If there aren't a bunch of severe misplays in the Dracotail mirror match, it can sometimes just feel like hand comparison, so knowing how to navigate that matchup is definitely key. But that's it for the main deck, it is 40 cards. Then for my extra deck, I have 1 copy of Spirits, 1 Hieratic Seal, 1 SP, 1 Hope Harbinger, 1 Typhon, 1 Mud Dragon, 1 Garura, 1 Guillemil, 1 Kaus, 1 Philia Regis, 1 Secretarian Dragon, 3 copies of Arfalion, and 1 Mysterion. One change that I probably would make is to play another copy of Secretarian Dragon, and I would likely just cut the Typhon for it. Typhon is a very powerful card. When you have 5 mana in your hand, you can make this card, and the restriction of not being able to summon further doesn't really matter. Because you make Typhon, you clear their board, and then you can play in their turn with 5 mana, after you already have cracked their field. Preferably, this card is also a floodgate against decks like Ryseal or Mitsurugi. However, in the past few months that I played this deck, I haven't felt a Typhon comes up enough to really justify playing this card, if there was something else that I really wanted to play instead. And I felt the second copy of Secretarian Dragon was something that could have come up. So moving forward, I'll likely be making that change. But that's it for the extra deck. Then for the side deck, I have 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird, 3 copies of Bolshami Meows, 3 copies of Artifact Lancia, 3 copies of Kistira Fenrir, and 3 copies of Super Polymerization. I decided to cut the Super Polys to the side deck. I wanted to main deck the cards like Talents and Prosperity, but I still wanted to have this card somewhere in my deck. The Fenrir is really good for beating Retaliating Sea and just making your turn 1 combo that much better. Especially the combo that I'm about to show you with Dark-End Dragon. It is very nice to have a Fenrir on the field and a Fenrir in the hand. Fenrir also beats Isuna, which can be quite troublesome for your deck. The Artifact Lancia was for Malice, and perhaps if I were to run into Lunalight or Orcust, which I actually did, this card would have come up. Not that I expected to play a whole bunch of them, even though I knew there would be some Malice players in the tournament. I wanted to have Lancia against them just because those matchups can be a bit dice rolly, and that these all-in combo decks, it doesn't really matter if they don't play optimally. They can make small mistakes, but their combo can still be so powerful that you can't push through. And that is also why I'm side decking Bolshami Meows, which is yet another card which is really good against these all-in combo decks. By having 9 copies of the Bolshamis post side, it is very likely that they have to stop their combo, otherwise they're gonna give me a bunch of cards. If they give me too many cards, I can probably crack the field. And if they don't, then just make a half field. I can maybe crack that as well, and then just beat their follow-up. And then the draw is just for any combo deck, and a lot of the time when you go first, having this card can be quite nice. But that's it for the deck profile. Now for the combo with Dark-End Dragon. There are different ways to perform the combo and get the end field you're aiming to get to. But this is one example and should help illustrate to you what I'm aiming to do with this deck. So starting with a hand like this, you would summon the Dark-End Dragon, usually banishing the Kaus, but there are situations where I have banished Philia Regis or Arfalion instead. Then you use Dark-End Dragon Evapораtion's effect to fuse, and you send your monster and Mululu to the graveyard, fusing away both of these into an Arfalion. You then use Arfalion's effect, adding both of these back, and using the graveyard effect of Mululu as Chain Link 2. Setting a Ketu and adding these to your hand. Then you activate Ketu to add Lucius, which you then summon to the field to add 5 mana. Here you link away the Arfalion and the Dark-End Dragon into an Erratic Seal. You then pitch the 5 mana to fuse the Mululu and the Lucius away into a Secretarian Dragon. Here you trigger the effect of Arfalion as Chain Link 1 and Lucius as Chain Link 2. You do this because you've already checked for cards like Skullmeister should they have it on the Mululu. But they could have had a card like Bell in their hand, which they haven't had a chance to activate yet. So you just wanna chain block that by doing Arfalion as Chain Link 1. And with that you set a Rahu and bring back the Arfalion. Here you activate Secretarian Dragon's effects, targeting the Lucius and the Mululu. You return Lucius to your deck and summon Mululu to the field. This will remain here to fuse on their turn. Then you overlay both of these into a Hope Harbinger. Then you activate Rahu Dracotail. You fuse away the dead monster in your hand, as well as an Urgula from your deck, into the second copy of Arfalion. Unfortunately you can't make Guillemil here, and that's because the Dark-End Evaporation Dragon locks you into dragons, which all of these cards are, so despite that it's not too much of a concern. Then with the Urgula, you generally set Flame, in that this is just the best card when you go first in game 1 blind. Should you play against something like Malice, you obviously would grab the Horn, if you only can access that one trap. If you draw a hand of 5 cards, generally it contains more than 1 copy of Mululu. You will have other Dracotail names as well, and if you do, then you can likely go for multiple traps. And then before you pass turn, use Urgula's effect, putting himself to the bottom of your deck and adding 5 mana back to your hand. Then in the opponent's turn, you have a lot of different disruptions at your disposal. Your Seal can summon Urgla or Pan from the deck, which you then can fuse away and get their bonus effects. You can also summon Magnamut should you want to go for a grind game, in that you'll be able to search a Malulu in the end phase, and ensure that you have a good play on the following turn. And then naturally, seeing as you have Malulu and 5 mana in the hand, you have access to 2 potential fusion summons. And with the traps, you can obviously draw into other monsters to fuse with as well. One last thing to note is that you could use the Hieratic Seal to summon Magnamut from your deck. Summon the third copy of Folion and bounce this card back to your hand, to effectively search a DD Crow, which certainly can be a good play against decks like Mitsurugi, where the Urgla and Pan pop might be inconsequential. But that's it for the deck profile. Did you guys like this combo and my theory on why I chose to play this version of the deck, as opposed to the branded variant? Let me know in the comments. But until we see each other again, thank you for watching and have a good rest of your day. If you enjoy my content, make sure to also subscribe to my second channel, linked in the description box down below. There I'll be posting more personalized and exclusive content.